Welcome to the second day of ICVA's second virtual annual conference, Climate, Environment, and Humanitarian Action. How can NGOs mitigate and adapt? I'm ICVA's Learning and Program Coordinator and Climate and Environment Focal Point. Thank you. And now I will hand over the floor to Ignacio Packer, the Executive Director of ICVA. Over.
Thank you very much, Nishani. And yes, welcome to day 2 of ICVA's annual conference. A conference where we focus on the role that NGOs will play in adapting the way we work to be better prepared to climate and environmental shocks. So, quick reminder, yesterday, the first session looked at the intersection between humanitarian I got that one wrong, eh? No, we opened and then we moved on to a World Cafe with 10 initiatives and 19 speakers, organized as breakout groups, and the World Cafe offered a spotlight and showcasing of initiatives. I just checked, we have an additional 130 people who have registered since yesterday. So this brings the total above 1,500 or 1,600 registrations. And as Nishani explained, with different options to join, including on this platform and on live stream. Now, today, later on, so at 2 p.m. Geneva CST, so in 4.5 hours, we will already have the closing session of this annual conference, where we will look at how different sectors could work together. The session you're now on, focuses on the localization and funding linkages when working in climate, environment, humanitarian contexts. We have a keynote address, and really very happy to have you with us, Mr. Jagan Chapagain, Secretary General of IFRC, and then that would be followed by a panel discussion. Dear Jagan, last week, one photo showing a volunteer with the Spanish Red Cross, Luna, comforting a migrant on a beach in Spain's North African enclave of Ceuta, generated engagement on social media. You tweeted this great message. Luna represents our very best. You continue saying, I couldn't be more proud of her and the millions of Red Cross and Red Crescent volunteers. Gracias, Luna, for shining a light. Gracias, Luna, for showing the world what humanity looks like. Mr. Jagan Chapagain is the Secretary General of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. He took up his role early 2020. Mr. Chapagain began his career as Luna, as a youth volunteer. It was at the Nepal Red Cross, advocating and representing community voices, showing what humanity looks like. The principle of humanity is the fundamental value at play in every humanitarian worker, wherever they are in the world today. I'm very pleased, we are very pleased to have you with us today. Jagan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ignacio, for that beautiful introduction. So I don't know how will I follow you now, but really, really thank you. And of course, the Luna can be any of you and any of the volunteers that work for all the members of ICVA. So I think it's very important that we celebrate the work done by our volunteers at the most local level all around the world. So really, really thank you for that very generous introduction, Ignacio. I'm very pleased to be here. When Ignacio asked me whether I could join this conference, I was trying to think between the IFRC, the organization which I represent, and of course ICVA, where many of the NGOs come together under a platform not very similar to what the Federation is. Of course, we are the collection of the 192 national societies and close to 171,000 local branches. And in some way, you have a very similar setup, having the organizations from all around the world working at the most local level coming together. So I thought this is a very interesting opportunity to come together and share notes. So I'm very pleased that I could be here. I'm sure there could be learning for you from an organization like mine, who is there for more than 100 years. But there could also be learning for us from you, you being much newer and much more dynamic, and maybe with that startup mindset of vibrancy, and also the type of informality you bring as an organization. Just look at Ignacio and me here. Ignacio dressing informal and looking very smart, and me dressing very formal and looking very boring. So there could be a lot of learning also we can have from each other. So, and I really think that this interaction today, I hope will help us build that learning from each other, and we can actually be better together. I'm sure you have been talking about it during this conference around the pandemic and how the pandemic made the localization so prominent when we could not deploy these massive international deployments that used to happen in a similar crisis in the past was not possible. So who came forward? Organizations like yours came forward. Organizations like mine came forward. All the local branches, all those volunteers came forward. And they have actually delivered a pretty good job. I think in our case, more than 1 million volunteers have been out every single day for the last 15 months. And of course, when we calculate the financial contributions done internationally, we don't count the value of those 1 million volunteers who have gone out every day. And if we monetize that, although I don't believe we can really monetize the value of volunteers, it would come in billions. And I'm sure it is the same for you. So this pandemic, which we knew from before, has made the agenda of localization very much on the forefront. It has put it on the forefront. Now, the important aspect is, how do we then sustain some of the changes that pandemic forced on us? And that's, I think, a very important conversation for all of us to have together. For us in the IFRC, we were born in 1919 after the first global pandemic, 1917, 1918, and in the aftermath of the First World War. The IFRC was born, and then, of course, we had to build and adapt over 100 years to be relevant to the changing world and the changing crisis. And I think the pandemic sort of brings that inflection points that we all have to also get ready to change, adapt, and be effective today, be fit for purpose today, and be relevant for tomorrow. And I think that's a very, very important work we need to do. And here I want to share with you a little bit how we in the IFRC, as a membership organization, organized the pandemic response. What we did was we focused on the domestic capacity of our membership. That was our primary focus. Knowing the restriction imposed by the pandemic and, of course, all the new regulations the governments imposed, we focused on the domestic response. We focused on the domestic resource mobilization. We focused on mobilizing our human resources capacity that existed in the country and complemented internationally. And just to share with you that our 2.5 billion global plan, more than 75% of the resources were mobilized domestically. Less than 25% came internationally. Less than 25%. But in all our conversation, we talk about that 25%, but we don't generally talk about that 75%. And that is excluding the value of the volunteers. And this, we did it absolutely to demonstrate the value of local actors, value of local action, and value of what the empowered local organizations and volunteers can actually bring forward. So I wanted to share with you, because a lot of times we feel that we have to always look internationally to raise the resources, and I absolutely support the value the international organizations bring. They do help save lives. They do help really advance the agenda. So I'm not anti-international. I represent one international organization myself. But we must value the capacity that is there locally, the knowledge that is there locally, resources that exist there locally, and we need to start recognizing and valuing it systematically. And if we don't do it ourselves, nobody else will do it, colleagues. So we should be the first one to recognize and take pride on what we do and what we can do locally. And that's, for me, a first important message, and I hope it resonates with you, and I believe many of you are already doing it. Now, as part of this, I also want to share with you something, and this may make me instantly very unpopular among many of you, but I need to share with you. Colleagues, there is no successful localization. There is no successful localization without a significantly increased investment on our accountability mechanism. I know a lot of times when the issue of the accountability comes, the demand for accountability comes, we tend to a little bit take it negatively. And my strong advice to you would be, let's not do that. Let's not focus on accountability because the donors are asking. Let's focus on accountability because this is the right thing to do. And this is what we believe in. Because if we are not able to deliver in an accountable manner, and I'm telling you this with my own personal experience and some of the challenges we have seen in our own organization, and I'm being very upfront and honest with you. There are challenges around fraud and corruption. There are challenges around the sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment, as we have seen in the news. And it doesn't exist only in the international organization. Unfortunately, it exists in many other organizations too. There are issues around the racism. There are issues around the discrimination. And we should not be afraid to acknowledge when the problem exists, try to prevent when possible, but try to take action when unfortunate things happen. So I call on you, or call on all of us, that let's take the issue of accountability seriously. Not because the donors are asking for this, or the international organizations are asking for this, but because we believe in this, and this is the right thing to do. If we strengthen the accountability in all levels of our organization, that's when the localization will come true. Now, let me also share maybe 2 or 3 messages before I close. The first, and these are some very important message for us and for you working at the most local level. Of course, we need to continue to respond to the needs when the needs, humanitarian needs, development needs arise. But our ambition should be not always addressing the needs, but in reducing the needs, in shrinking the needs, how we invest on community resilience so that we actually reduce the need for humanitarian action. And that's where I think all the local actors need to put much more emphasis, and not only the cycle of response, but not investing on the community resilience. It's not going to be sustainable. It's not dignified for the people. So let's really work together towards reducing the needs. And part of that, of course, as you know, almost 75% of the disasters we are responding are linked to climate. And what we have believed in the Red Cross Restoration Movement was we need to come all the humanitarian sector together and pool our resources and our brain, our knowledge to really develop the climate action, not only advocacy. Advocacy is important, but climate action to start making a difference. And that's where I think, as a Red Cross Restoration Movement, we have come together to develop the climate charter. I understand, ICVA is very, very keen. You have been engaged in this development and you are very keen to support that. Let's really use this climate charter, climate and environmental charter, as a fundamental for all the humanitarian sectors to come together and scale up our action to make a real difference in the people's lives and building the community resilience and actually reducing the needs, reducing the humanitarian needs. I know you will be discussing a bit more on this on the panel, and my colleague Tiziana will, of course, elaborate a bit more. The other message I want to share with you now as we are sort of dealing with the pandemic is, I think, this whole notion around build back better. And I have been one of those very vocal that we should not be focusing on building back better. That's a wrong notion. We don't want to build back to what brought us here. We should we should be really focusing on building forward better, learning from the lesson of this pandemic and many other crises, and of course, many other development challenges, and get ready ourselves and make our organization ready to build forward future, thinking forward, looking forward, and really positioning ourselves as the local actors that can address the needs of today, but is also ready to address the needs of the future. So that will be sort of my message. And let me close by sharing with you a quote from Martin Luther King. You know, when we are dealing with this pandemic, and of course there are many, many challenges here. And what Martin Luther King said is, you know, if you cannot fly, run. If you cannot run, walk. If you cannot walk, crawl. But by all means, keep moving. While we deal with this pandemic and the challenges it has brought to us, we have to keep on moving. And with this, I really want to thank you for this opportunity, to Ignacio and all of you to share, you know, these 3 or 4 messages. I hope some of this resonates with you. I'm really, really looking forward to developing this conversation and learning from each other. Thank you so much. Over to you, Ignacio.
Domestic response, common sense, efficiency, accountability, keep moving, the foundation of our humanitarian action. Great opening for our session. Really appreciate, Jagan, you joining us with your address during another very busy day for you. So thank you very much, Jagan.
Thank you. Thank you.
We turn now to our panel moderator, Stephanie Youssef. Stephanie is ICVA's Deputy Regional Representative for MENA, based in Amman. Over to you, dear colleague.
Thank you very much, Ignacio. And thank you, Jagan, for setting the scene and kickstarting this session with such an inspirational call for collective action to address humanitarian development, climate silos through building community resilience, embracing the localization agenda, strengthening and investing in accountability mechanisms, and together build forward better. It is lovely to have everyone tune in with us today for this session, where we will still have the opportunity to zoom in from global to local, focusing on localization and funding linkages when working in climate, environment, humanitarian contexts. At this point in time, non-government actors, NGOs, civil societies, academias have become vital and an integral part of the global climate governance. Events such as this are important efforts to accelerate climate action by facilitating dialogue and exchanging knowledge. And I want to thank our lovely panel for joining us today to move this conversation further. In this session, we will note how local action is critical to tackling climate change. Growing recognition of the importance of expanding access to locally appropriate services has led NGOs to play an increasing role as brokers and intermediaries of climate information. The local scale is where most adaptation actions are now and will in the future take place. Today, we will listen to our talented panel on various experiences in different locations and examine what action and change is required from NGOs, donors, and partners alike to share risks, to mitigate and adapt the way we work. At this time, I would like to take a moment and introduce our panel for today. And please note that full biographies are available on our website and in the link in the chat box. Ms. Soraia Sadat is currently the project manager in the Women's Activities and Social Services Association in Afghanistan, WASA. She is currently in charge of WASA's Youth Women Empowerment Program. She is also a member of WASA's programmatic team, where she contributes to the creation of new funding and programs, especially proposal writing based on WASA's mandates. Mr. Amadou Diallo joined the START Network in 2018 as the ARC Replica Coordinator for Senegal, in charge of managing in-country activities in partnership with the government of Senegal and START Network members in Senegal. Since January 2021, Amadou is the Disaster Risk Financing Regional Coordinator for the START Network. and has been supporting the START Network disaster risk financing initiatives in Africa, which includes the ARC Replica initiative in Senegal, Zimbabwe, and Somalia, as well as the forecast-based financing programs in Zimbabwe, Kenya, and Madagascar. We also have Ms. Tiziana Bonzon, the manager for climate, migration, and resilience at the IFRC in Geneva. She has over 20 years of experience with the IFRC and has held several roles spanning from operation to coordination to policy work, planning, monitoring, and evaluation. Between April 2015 and June 2020, she led the migration and displacement portfolio and played a key role in the development of the IFRC Global Strategy on Migration adopted by the General Assembly in November 2017. And last but not least, we do have Ms. Praneeta Kapur, who is currently the country advisor for the American Jewish World Service, AJWS, in India. She joined AJWS in January of 2014 and is based in New Delhi, India. As country advisor, she works with the team to build a robust grassroots program portfolio. She built the Candida program in India and oversees its growth and cohesiveness is part of a significant part of her work. At this time, I would like to welcome all of our distinguished panelists and thank you again for joining us. Noting that this topic is quite complex and will require more time than allocated, we want to ensure that we can get the most out of today. So we'll be asking different questions to each of the panel members, and at the end, we will have time for Q&A. So please do use the chat box for your questions. So at this time, we'll get started with Ms. Soraia. Soraia, noting your background and work on women and youth empowerment, we wanted to start by asking you, how do NGOs and partners need to improve and empower women and youth leadership in decision-making, funding, planning, and programming on climate, environment, and humanitarian action at the local level?
Thank you so much, Stefan, and good morning, everybody. So referring to your question, first of all, I would like to say something about the Afghanistan situation, and directly after that, I will refer to the questions that you have asked. As we know that Afghanistan is a male-dominant country, that most of the women are staying at home, and unpleasant tradition and culture cannot hear their voices, and the women cannot speak out. And the recent and unstable political situation as well affected the women, that they cannot show their voices for the people who are around the world. So referring to the question that you have said, that how the NGOs and partners can have empowered the women or the role of women around the world, I'm going to talk about 4 specific issues that how they can support women to decision-making, planning, and budgeting, and so on. So the first thing that I would like to share, that we have seen that 20 years, there was many projects that they were worked in Afghanistan, but they were not very stable and they were in a very short term. So the first thing that we are going to say, that is about the women capacity building and empowerment programs. That when they are going to have such projects in Afghanistan, it should not be in a short term. It should be in a very long term, and there should be some capacity building programs which will be provided for women in order to show their talents and to show how they can participate in different aspects. The second thing that I'm going to say, that's about the economic and development initiatives. That in this way, women, since they are not enough self-sufficient in Afghanistan and they do not have a good income, so they are not going to hear their voices, and even they are not going to have to have a role in decision making. So once there are some economic development initiatives, the women can be self-sufficient, they can be independent, and on that moment they can show or they can participate in different decision-making process. As an example, I can say that in Western zone of Afghanistan, that right now I'm living in Herat province, there are some initiatives program, as I can say, that's about agriculture. Since Afghanistan is an agricultural country, so women can participate in such programs. In Herat province, there is the cultivation of saffron that right now they are exporting it from Afghanistan to other countries. And most of women are participating in this program. It means that they started from the cultivation program till to the processing of that one and all. So we can say that when they are enough self-sufficient, they can participate in decision-making programs as well. So the next thing that we can say that is about the NGOs and UN agencies that they can be as bridge builders. It means that when they are going to have some projects, it means in a short-term project, then they can be bridge builder among the women and the people who are working with. So in this way, also they can support women. It means that they can show them that there are some supporters who are motivating you and always they are assisting you. And the last thing that I'm going to share, that's about the coaching and mentoring programs. When they are going to have some coaching, it means that when the project is in a short term, so when it is expanded in a long term, so by coaching and mentoring them, it shows that there are some effective ways that the women can participate and they can be, their voices can be heard. So again, I'm saying that when the woman in Afghanistan is independent, it means that they are self-sufficient, they have a good income. On that moment, they can be a part of or a participant in the decision-making as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very well said and so eloquently spoken. It is very important to understand that the increasing involvement of women and where we should go towards, including more long-term projects. At this time, Soraia, I really wanted you to discuss, in 2018, there was a devastating drought in Afghanistan, which directly affected more than 2/3 of Afghanistan. And it did set a trend for what is expected to intensify in the future based on climate change scenarios for Afghanistan. So given that, could you please share what are the lessons learned from that drought? What are the important lessons on adaptation, mitigation, and communication at the local level?
So thank you so much, Stefan. As it is clear, it is obviously clear for everybody that Afghanistan is a country that most of the time they are facing or confronting with drought. And as a witness, I can say that in 2018, there was amounts of people that they have migrated from the other provinces of Afghanistan to Herat province, or we can say to the west zone of Afghanistan. So the lessons that we have learned that there was lack of dynamic management from the government of Afghanistan. It means that they did not have any prediction or any forecast that this huge amount of people are coming to this province. I can say that lots of people, they were just settling and they were sitting on the streets. As a witness, I can say that one, that there were many children, women, men, they were just on the streets and there was nothing to do for them. So the first thing that we can say that before having that amount of people from the other provinces of Afghanistan, there should be specific locations for those IDPs. It means that the government of Afghanistan is responsible to specify specific locations for the people who are coming to the province, or maybe they immigrate from the other provinces to Herat province or some other locations. It means that when there is a specific locations, so people, they can, it means that at least they have a specific place to sit. But when they are on the streets, it is something very horrible, we can say. The second thing that was, another thing that we have faced, that was about the supports and the assistance which was provided by UN agencies, or maybe some, even the national level, or we can say from the organizations that they were working there. It was in a very temporary manner. It was not in a long term. Imagine that thousands of people, they came in Herat province or west zone of Afghanistan and they have settled. Then what was the responsibility of the UN agencies or the other agencies that they were working, humanitarian agencies? They provided all their assists, or they provided the needs of those people in a very short term. It was not in a long term. Imagine it was only for 1 or 2 months. And when the project was finished, the other huge amount of people came in Herat province, and there was not sufficient assistance for the rest of the people who arrived there. So a lack of this plan also was visible, and there was not enough support for those people. About the reintegration, again, I can say that there was not any specific plan for from the government of Afghanistan for them. There was not any plan for their returning back to their provinces or for reintegration them with the host community. That it was also lacking, that still we are facing with such difficulties. As a person who is working and who is in charge of the, or we can say the project manager of Women Youth Empowerment Project in Herat province, right now I am facing with such difficulties. Still they are not reintegrated with the people, it means with the host community, and still there is not any plan for them to return back to their provinces. And still they are waiting for the assistance which will be provided from the agencies who are working in humanitarian issues. So these issues were the things that I have noticed. The first one was lack of dynamic management, lack of good locations for them for settlement, and the projects that it was in a very temporary manner. And the last one was no plan for reintegration or for returning back those people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think there's so much to learn there, and I actually think maybe we'll have a chance to get back to it in the Q&A session. Because there are some questions related to that. But while we're on the, we're currently sharing experiences and lessons learned, I think it'd be really good, interesting to turn to Mr. Amadou to share your experiences with the drought in Senegal. I mean, it was fascinating to read about the joint program with the 6 START members and the government of Senegal to deliver assistance in 2020 to the families ahead of the severe large-scale drought. So this progressive programming is quite unique, and it'll be great if you can tell us a little bit more about it and the experience of what START has been working on at the country level to improve resilience of communities in the context of this project.
Thank you very much, Stephanie, and hello everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you. I will share a little bit about the experience we had in Senegal with the Arc Replica initiative. So just to give you some background, so the Arc Replica program is run in partnership between the START network, the government of Senegal, and the African Risk Capacity. It's funded by the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development through the German Development Bank. And we had 6 START network members who were implementing this program in Senegal. So it was Catholic Relief Services, Action Against Hunger, Oxfam, Plan International, World Vision, and Save the Children. So this program or this initiative is a mechanism, basically a mechanism that allows to purchase an insurance for certain hazards, such as drought. So in 2019, for the first time, START Network purchased an insurance with the African Risk Capacity, which is an African institution that has been funded since 2013 and provides insurance products to African member states. Now, we entered a partnership and WFP as well for certain countries where we could replicate the insurance purchase of the governments to increase the coverage for the population, so that if there is a drought, then we will be able to assist more people. So when we purchased this policy in 2019, was the first time that the insurance was purchased by a non-sovereign actor. And in 2019, there was a drought, and after that, the mechanism triggered, which allowed the payment of $23.1 million for Senegal, and we received $10.6 million as START Network to implement an anticipatory action before the impact of drought really hit the populations. So we were able to assist around 350,000 people in Senegal. This happened right in the middle of the COVID-19. So it was really a mechanism that allowed us to see how important it is to have mechanism that can help you prepare better and anticipate when some disasters are going to happen. So if you want to talk a little bit about the aspect of localization or the involvement of local actors. So from the onset of this program, we discussed with the communities to learn what were the indicators they would use to know what is drought. So we realized that in communities, people have a very rich indigenous knowledge that can be valued. And often it's not really something we look at. We only look at the scientific aspect, but we did a lot of work with the communities to learn how they would understand these hazards, how they would react to those hazards. And we monitored that during almost 1 year before the intervention to start. So this allowed us to really be accountable to those communities, because even before the disaster, we were able to discuss with them, to do some scenarios with them, to discuss with them what were the best activities to do, when would be the best moments to do an intervention if a disaster happened, to identify the window of opportunity and to really see when would be the most appropriate moment to act, and also what would be the best assistance on their own opinion. So just to say that when we are looking at risk information, we must be sure that we develop that with the communities being at the front seat and being able to tell us what is the direction, what is the way we should formulate. We should formulate some of the terms so that it's accessible to them and they understand, or else to see how we could relate to the indigenous knowledge so that we are able to see, they are able to link what they know or their own knowledge to what we are bringing to them as information to address those disasters.
Thank you very much. I mean, it is quite a fascinating program, and I think that maybe we can also talk about it a little bit more about in the Q&A. But based on, I mean, obviously to have progressive programming, there has to be funding as well. So, you know, we want to ask you, you know, based on your experiences, in your opinion, how can donors, UN, and other partners support in scaling up to anticipate, adapt, and mitigate to the changing context?
Thank you very much for this question. I think it's a very important question that we all must be able to relate to, and it's also something that is really in the context of where we are at right now. So if we see what happened with the COVID-19, we really, you know, few years before the COVID, we would hear people talking about IDAI, you know, showcasing it's like it was really one of the biggest disasters that we were able to see, and you know, and no one would have imagined that we would have something like COVID-19 happen. And when these things happen, we can see the amount of suffering, the amount of loss, damage that it brings. And I think it's a call for all of us to see also that we are accountable for the mandate we have been delegated by the governments to be able to see how we can improve the resilience of the communities, how we can build better responses, better mechanisms. And just to say that if the WFP has earned this Nobel Prize, you know, during this time, it's really something to show that, you know, our performance within such difficult contexts is what would make people trust us more. It's what would also make donors confident about, following our orientations. And I think we have our role is to really build very strong projects, programs, initiatives, pilots, look at innovations, work together, see how we can have common spaces of sharing information, sharing knowledge, and really understand that when something such as the COVID or a pandemic would happen, we would need to work together. And that is something, it's only by doing that we can really move forward. And we need to shift, we need to shift our mindset, because we cannot anymore approach crisis but on a reactive way. We have to be able to see how we can act early, how we can anticipate, and also see how we can mobilize funding. Because in most of the initiatives we are doing in our disaster risk financing work, one of the key components is the prepositioning of funding, because that is most of the time what is lacking. So we need to innovate. There would always be responses. We would always need to respond to disasters, but we need to see how we can change that, how we can see whatever we are able to anticipate, we anticipate that, so that the flow of funds would be differentiated. We would know how much we need for anticipation, even though we still need to respond, because some of the crises are unpredictable. We can have a conflict that can erupt at any time with no sign. We can have political violence at any time with no sign, and that would need to respond to that. But some other disasters or hazards are predictable. We have the means to predict them. We have models that have been built. So we need to look at that, all of us, see how we can coordinate together, and then approach donors together to see what we can propose.
Thank you very much for that. And again, we're talking about a call for collective action. And this is I want to stay a little bit on the same topic and move to Tiziana. And actually, the IFRC and the Red Cross societies, they have a forecast-based financing mechanism within the Disaster Relief Emergency Fund. So I wanted to ask you, Tiziana, welcome. Wanted to ask you, in your opinion, do you believe this model should be the model that is scaled up more systematically? And if so, or if not, what suggestions or recommendations do you have?
Thank you so much, Stephanie. I hope you can hear me well. And also thank you for giving us the opportunity to share some reflections as part of this panel. I have to say that after the very inspiring keynote address of the Secretary General, I do feel a little bit of pressure, but hopefully I will deal with that. You mentioned the forecast-based financing mechanism attached to the DREF, which is a disaster relief emergency fund. The DREF is not a new instrument, as many of you may know. It has been actually used for many, many years at the IFRC. It is, I would say, one of the most effective and rapid ways that the IFRC dispose of to support national Red Cross and Red Crescent societies to take actions at the outset of a crisis. But I think what is really important here to highlight is that it allows national societies to be really the first responders to the many small and medium disasters that don't hit the headlines and often go forgotten or neglected to some extent, but of course generate a lot of actions because there are humanitarian needs. So we looked at the DREF as an instrument that could be adapted to actually support increasingly anticipatory action and kind of building on what the previous speaker was exactly highlighting. And we realized that this was indeed a way for us to connect the work on anticipatory action that is really about being much more risk informed and using science and forecast and risk analysis to understand when is the best time to generate funding and resources and activate a number of mechanisms for local actors, in our case, national Red Cross and Red Crescent societies, to take the necessary steps to support communities to protect their lives and livelihoods. So we've been really adapting the draft to support this type of interventions by creating a specific, I would say, channel for directing funds that support anticipatory action. And we've been able to develop anticipatory action in some 29 countries with national Red Cross and Red Crescent societies, and have actually triggered the release of funding based on forecast in a number of contexts like Peru, Togo, Uganda, Bangladesh, Mozambique, Ecuador, and Mongolia since 2015. And anticipatory action means actually it translates into actions that go from allowing cash disbursements, for instance, to a variety of activities that go to distribution of animal kits. All of this is really about supporting communities to take the necessary steps so they can protect themselves and their livelihoods. But of course, the draft shouldn't be, and the forecast-based action mechanism shouldn't be seen in isolation. I think it's part of an approach that we want to promote and continue to scale up also with our partners and governments. For instance, one thing the National Red Cross and Red Crescent societies are doing through their auxiliary status is to work with their government counterparts to develop early action plans so that governments themselves can allocate budget lines to support anticipatory action. And another, of course, effort that we are conducting together with the anticipatory action pioneers and champions, and of course, agencies are really supporting this, like FAO, OCHA, WFP, and the START network, is to work together in some 60 countries to further develop anticipatory action. But while on one hand, we can indeed celebrate these important steps, injecting funding early is not sufficient if you don't have an absorptive capacity behind. And this is something that we have very much experienced with our National Red Cross and Red Crescent societies. You need to have a system that is prepared, that is ready to take actions, that has, for instance, the cash systems that developed to immediately distribute the cash, that has the right logistics infrastructure, and also the accountability that the Secretary General was talking about before. You know, we need to reinforce that level of accountability if we want anticipatory action to be truly effective. I think what is really important here is that indeed we are exploring, all of us, these disaster risk financing instruments. Instruments are important, but impact should come first. You know, the instrument should serve a purpose. And this is what we really need to understand as humanitarians. Because clearly insurances, companies, they will look at the instruments first. We are humanitarian agencies. We have to look at the impact and the needs that we will be addressing through the instruments that we will use. One final thing I'd like to also highlight. Anticipatory action is often linked to early warnings. And we know that early warnings, for instance, are not reaching the most at-risk communities in many cases, and not necessarily, you know, but even when the messages exist, even when they're promoted by national meteorological agencies, for instance, they're not necessarily in the language, the format, and the accessibility that is required for communities to take action. So we clearly have a specific role to play here. And just to maybe allow me to also mention that in addition to the charter, I'm sure we'll come to that, 2 weeks ago, we have launched together with WMO and ITU a call to action to further promote the common alerting protocol that is exactly about helping countries to adopt this emergency alerting, and for us as a humanitarian organization to translate these alerting protocols into messages that can be actionable and usable by communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tiziana. This is, I mean, very inspiring and it's fascinating to read about. It is important to understand the tools and to make sure that we're sharing this information to see what could be done more widely, even spread more widely. I want to ask you, actually, you mentioned instruments, and climate charter is very new and something that we heard about from Jagan, and actually yesterday it was highlighted as a case study in our annual conference. And I wanted to ask you, why now? How is the charter going to change the way humanitarian organizations work? And how can the charter be translated to local humanitarian action?
The charter is a big responsibility, and I think it's a commitment that we are all taking collectively. So why now? That's the first part of the questions. I mean, I'm sure a lot of the colleagues who are joining this call today will probably think, why didn't we think about it earlier? Because there's no time to lose. And the climate and environmental crisis is now a priority for There's no doubt now on the fact that this crisis is generating huge and tremendous humanitarian needs that are real today and will just increase as we keep moving, because we know that adaptation has limits. The progress that we're seeing on reducing the greenhouse gas emissions is probably not to the level that we would like to see, and we are already confronted with the consequences of the crisis. So the charter is really about bringing, I would say, existing commitments already and efforts that are taken by the humanitarian sector, whether in the form of developing guidelines and tools to integrate the climate risk into our programs and humanitarian operations, or whether it's about raising awareness and sensitizing the communities we work with. But also, it's about recognizing that we have a role to play. That we have to look much more at the way we are greening our humanitarian response. So the charter, I'm sure it was presented yesterday, is really made of these two very important elements, right? On one hand, the scaling up of adaptation. It's not about supporting communities to cope anymore. Coping is not sufficient any longer. It's about incremental and transformative work that needs to be done when it comes to adaptation. And at the same time, recognizing that we all have a role to play to not just do no harm, but actually do good, and looking very much at the impact of our programs and operations from a carbon footprint perspective. So the charter, why now? I guess a recognition that it's timely. It is a priority for all of us. There's a lot of work that has already been gone into this, but we need to come together. I think the gap that the charter is trying to address is really the fact that we need to come together. We need this sort of a collective approach, a strengthening our collaboration. And the beauty of the charter is that it allows small NGOs to very large international organizations to adapt the commitments to their own organizational and operational context. So the charter is giving the directions that each organization needs to take, build its own baseline, looking at the targets and the specific commitments that makes the most sense for them, so that together we can certainly, change the rules of the game and really have a strong contribution to this climate and environmental crisis. How can this be translated into local humanitarian action? Well, I think I said it. It's really about each organization looking at its own capacities and the way they operate, and take the charter as a guiding document to reflect on how their programs, operations, logistics, supply chain, the way that their staff work, all of this has to be embedded into the work through policies and an action plan that would follow. So even for the IFRC, we have come up with a number of specific targets that will be announced very soon. We are validating these targets with our membership, because clearly the 192 national societies will have to play a role. And this is something that we will be working on in the coming months. Just to end, the charter is actually not the end of something, it's the beginning. It's the beginning of a new journey that we all have to take together. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So eloquently spoken. Of course, the Charter's first commitment is to step up the humanitarian response to growing needs and help people adapt to the growing impacts of these crises. In the chat box, you'll also find a link to the charter for reference. At this time, last but not least, we want to welcome Ms. Praneeta to actually look at some of the groundwork of AJWS in responding directly to the victims' needs, following advocacy work and fundraising alongside local actors. We want to first ask if you can help us examine and go through what are the due diligence processes and standards used to work with partners, especially since this is something that's come up on our chat and in all of the topics regarding accountability mechanism. So Ms. Praneeta, I welcome you.
Thank you, Stephanie, for having me, and thank you for a good question. Let me just really quickly start by telling everybody what AJWS does and who we are. So the American Jewish World Service is a human rights funding organization. We work in 18 countries across Latin America, the Caribbean, Africa, Asia, Southeast Asia. And we're basically a human rights grant-making organization. And we work on issues of civil and political rights. We work on issues of sexual health and rights. We work on climate change issues, and humanitarian aid is something that kind of is a fourth pillar and something that we work across all of these themes. We have 400 partners across the 18 countries that we work in, give or take. And in India, we have about 80. A lot of the experiences that I'm going to share with you are going to be based on the work that we do here, but this is really primarily how we work across all of the countries. I think before I talk to you about the due diligence processes that we follow, I wanted to share with you a little bit about, what are the kind of funding modalities that we use as a grant-making organization in the countries we work in. The first thing that we do is that we have in-country staff. People like me who are placed in the countries where the organization funds. We have individuals like me who and others. We have a 6-person team here in India who've been part of development movements and social movements across the country for many years, all of our professional lives. So we bring that experience to the grant making that we do. We have partnerships with organizations that are long-term. A typical relationship, I think the shortest would be 7 to 10 years. So our relationship with grantees are typically very long. And we do have a preference for what we call core grants as opposed to project grants. So really to look at an organization that is value-based and principally aligned with AJWS and the way that our worldview, and then fund these organizations for a long duration of time. I think one of the things that we recognize as a grant-making organization is that we have our own strategies and our own outcomes and our own accountability and monitoring methodologies. Those are for the selection. Those aid us and assist us in the selection of partners, but have no weight at all on the programming that partners do. So I think that's kind of the background that I wanted to give to you before I talked about due diligence and how we select our partners. And when it comes to humanitarian aid, you'll see how it all flows in. So we have a very strong, within India, in most of the countries that we operate in, there are certain legal requirements for organizations that can receive foreign funding to have. And we're very strict in making sure that these requirements are in place. We also have very strict internal checks for ourselves to see that the organizations are indeed auditing their accounts, the usual, paying their taxes, doing all of the, the requisite needed due diligence that is required of an organization working in a country context. This is kind of one set of it. We do then have our own we don't solicit grants. We go out to partners and say, we would like to work with you. We really like the work that you do. Would you like to work with us? We would like to support the work that you're doing. And before we can go there and really reach out to partners, we have to do our diligence, which is apart from this entire, like looking at the finances, etc. We do our own reference checks. And this is where, having in-country representation is really effective, because we have networks, we have people, we have organizations that we worked with, been associated with in the past, and all of that comes into play when we need to look at the feasibility of taking somebody on as a new partner. I think in terms of, because we have a stringent process of selection of partners, when there is a humanitarian crisis, be it, as we speak right now, there is a cyclone that has made landfall in 2 of the eastern states of the country. We have about 12 partners there who have, who are located in the states where the cyclone is impacting, even as we speak, as I said. So I think really having partners that are there, that are on the ground, and that are looping to us and telling us what the situation is in real time helps us not be very rigid when it comes to our grant making. So we prefer to make disaster grants to organizations that that are already existing partners. And we usually do make them to these organizations. So when they have a grant that already has been made to them, if there is a disaster, when there is a disaster, we're very quick to be able to repurpose our grants, although the grant is for working with adolescent girls or with sexual minorities or with the trans community. The fact that these organizations are located where the disaster is hitting makes it easy for them to be responsive very quickly, to respond immediately using the grant money that they already have. And so it's easy for us to, it's really easy for us, or it becomes important for us to very quickly repurpose grants so that they're able to use it where the need is at that moment. I think the grant making process for when disaster hits, therefore, for our partners is very, very simple. It's as simple as a WhatsApp message or a signal message. We've had Tokate, which just in the last 2 weeks has hit now the western coast of India a week ago. Again, we have partners there, one of whom already has a grant agreement for disaster relief. So the way that it worked was, we were in touch with them. They were 60 kilometers from the landfall, exactly where the landfall of this other cyclone has been. And so we reached out to them. We were in touch with them. 24 hours, of course, no contact because there was no electricity, there was no ability to make contact. As soon as we could, we were in touch with them, trying to understand what the situation was. Within 2 days, they were able to make a small visit to one side of their field area, assess the damage. They texted us and sent the information of what they wanted to do and what the situation was in Gujarati, which is a local language here, which was then translated by AJWS team members locally, sent to our New York office. Sorry, I didn't say that. We're headquartered in New York. Sent to the office over there, and because it works really well, daytime ends there and a workday starts here. So we're able to use the 24-hour cycle. Sent them the message in a very simple format, and had a grant agreement with them, with the partner, pretty much the morning after they had submitted the WhatsApp notes. So really, that's how the system works for us.
Thank you very much. I mean, very interesting methods to proactive and thorough yet simplified selection processes of partners and different methodology of working directly with them during the different stages. So, I mean, thank you for that thorough response. And I wanted to ask you, how do you, as a trusted philanthropy, trust-based philanthropy, see the localization and funding agenda evolve in the next few years, noting that the impacts of climate change on local action? And what do we need to do to be prepared for these changes?
Stephanie, a lot has been said, I think, right from the keynote when Jagan spoke about localization. I think the writing is on the wall with the pandemic. The fact of the matter is that you can't have a one-size-fits-all policy decided somewhere, in some Western country or northern or southern or any country that is then going to be applicable for the rest of the world. That's really not going to be the future. I'd really like to share kind of some of the stuff I've referred to already, but some of the principles that I think we've been working on for the past many years that I think are also indicators to how the future would look like. And starting with exactly localization. I mean, you have to find local solutions to local problems. The humanitarian crisis does not look the same across the world. In a country the size of India, it's different from state to state. And so we can't even have a local, one-size-fits-all solution for the country. And so you really, really have to break it down into smaller pieces. When you say that you have to break it down into smaller pieces, the first thing that has to go is a rigid response, right? You have to be flexible. So you have to be, for example, willing to repurpose grants. I mean, nobody foresaw the pandemic, right? Now, you can't say, I want to carry on my adolescent girls programming and have an education camp where 1,500 girls are going to be spending 3 months together to learn, the smart subjects. It's not going to work. So really, you have to say, okay, that's not happening right now. What we need is something different. You've got to be able to be flexible, repurpose, reuse, without and I'm just like bringing in the issue of accountability. I'm not saying don't be accountable. It's a dialogue, it's a discussion. When we say we repurpose grants, it's after conversations with our partners to say, okay, if we're not going to do this, we're going to do this. But of course, when we say we're going to do something else, we are going to make sure that it does happen to the best of the ability that it can happen, given the situation on the ground. I think that more and more as we're looking at diversity and inclusion, and I think we have to recognize power, and I think that we have to recognize a lot of power that is inherent in a funding relationship. And I think that when we talk about localization, we cannot talk about localization without looking at really trusting what the people on the ground are saying. So if I'm not there right now in West Bengal, where Yash is hitting, I believe 100% what my partners are going to tell me about what the ground situation is. Not only do I believe them when they tell me what they're saying, I have full faith in what they see are the short-term and long-term solutions to help the communities that are impacted. I have to put that faith, otherwise it's again not going to work. It's not my strategy. It's really their strategy for doing what needs to be done on the ground. I said this about flexibility. When I say that, I want to maintain diligence, due diligence, accountability. I don't think these are not, they're not to be impediments, but they're not. I don't think they have to be thrown out of the window when you say flexibility. What I want to add with flexibility, I think, is creativity. So you've got to be flexible. You've got a mind for due diligence, but you've also got to be creative. You want to use Signal in this time. You want to use WhatsApp if that's what's working. So let's be creative. Let's use means and methodologies of getting money across to partners within legal frames as is possible when times get tough. If they're not going to be able to, access a grant making mechanism through the internet because the internet is down and they can only do it on the phone, let's use the phone as a means to be as real to the process as we can. And I think another point that I have is to fund what really the partners need to fund and not what the funder strategy needs them to fund. I think that's something, that flexibility, it's very difficult to do because very often, organizations with vast amounts of money have to have very, well laid out theories of change and strategies and outcomes that are usually 10 years long. And it's very difficult then to shift. But we have to build that resilience into our framing of what our strategies are going to be. And I think finally, something that's really, really crucial to AJWS is something what we call accompaniment. So it's really about being a partner to partners and walking the walk with them. Having the ear on the ground, not knowing what's best for them at all, but having a bird's eye view, right? Because your location is a little bit different. So while you're seeing something that's happening with the cyclone that happened in the west 2 weeks ago, there's a cyclone that's happening on the left, on the east now, and so you can bring experiences from one to another and share those. So be bridges. We spoke about bridges on the panel before. Really be bridges, but be advisors. Be someone who can plug partners in with other funders, other networks, not be gatekeepers for partners, but really be someone who can help the partner on the ground achieve their fullest potential. Yeah, I'll stop here.
That is really wonderful, Praneeta. And actually, you summarized and really actually pointed at many of the suggestions and recommendations when it comes to the localization agenda at a very broad scale. I mean, you talked about building the bridges, and building the trusts, and being flexible, and listening to the partners, and meaningful work when it comes to the local partners. Now, I thought that since we're on the topic, I will go ahead and start with you, since there was actually a question directed to you, Praneeta, about what role do you play in building the capacity of local partners to work better apart from the grant that you give for intervention?
So there are many roles that we play. Like I said, just building on this last one, which is around what we call accompaniment. The other word that we use for it is capacity building, but that brings in a certain power, a power kind of imbalance, and so we don't use capacity building as much as we like to use accompaniment. I think the role that we play, like I said, is very much that of that we like to. I hope that we play is that of building building bridges. And like, for example, I'd like to share about 4 years ago. Again, so AJWS is not only working in India, but I said we work in Southeast Asia, South Asia, and Southeast Asia as well. And so one of the things that we did, for instance, was bring together all of the countries that are in the region that are very impacted by cyclones periodically, right, because of our location. And so really brought together partners from across these countries to look at, and spend some time looking at disaster relief responses, and really look at strategies that they can have for preparedness, again, that we've spoken about on this panel. And so I think that is, that kind of bringing together of organizations, plugging them in with other funders is another very crucial role that we play. We're a small funding organization. We don't have access to very large resources. We do have access to be able to give core grants to partners, which I think partners appreciate very much, but they need more money than what we can give them. So really, how do you make linkages to other partners? I think these are ways in which we are, that we accompany partners. There was something else, but it's gone on my head right now. We'll come back.
Thank you very much for that. And we actually have another question that was for Amadou, asking how easy has it been working with the leaders of African governments on issues of accountability and humanitarian intervention? How willing are they to contribute money for disaster prevention and preparedness?
Okay, so thank you very much for this question. So working on accountability with governments, basically, I would say that usually governments would look at indicators such as the number of people that were benefited from the assistance, and they would look at the areas where they intervened. So those are the kind of indicators they would relate most of the time, or the quantity of goods that were delivered, And the accountability is not really something that governments are really used to monitor. So I would say that in our experience, we were able to really sensitize the governments of the importance of the accountability. For example, in one of the regions where we intervened, during the targeting of the beneficiaries, we had an approach where we would have two groups that would be in one village. For example, if that village was selected to benefit from the assistance, we would ask the village to constitute two groups, one group of men and one group of women. And we would ask the two groups to go in different places, and then we would give them the list of beneficiaries that were selected. And those two groups would confront, later on we will confront what the two groups have decided. So that was to really allow women to also be involved in the process and also part of the decisions that were being made. And later on, we also had a local steering committee that was in place with beneficiaries that were part of the committee, with the local authorities that were also part of this committee, and some local actors, NGOs, etc., that would invest in this area. And throughout the project, at each phase, all these members would meet, discuss about, you know, the orientations of the project, if everything was fine, if there was some difficulties. And I think it was an approach that the government was not really used to do, and they really saw how important it was. And I think that this is something that we are sure that in next responses, they would definitely be able to do this sort of mechanisms. And they also understood how important it is, because we ended up with very few complaints, even though there were complaints like in any response. But we ended up really with being able to manage the complaints, to collect them, to know in time what was wrong, or if it was a lack of understanding for some of the beneficiaries, to really be able to provide the information on time. And I think this is, I would say that it's just about the indicators. So I think we can sensitize governments to really try to see how they can integrate accountability as also a performance aspect, and look at what are the key performance indicators, you know, we can develop to standardize in a way the way responses are monitored or projects are monitored.
Thank you for that. So, I mean, it is obviously, you know, still a work in progress, and yes. And that's kind of what I got from you. So thank you for that, for sharing your experiences there. Tiziana, I also have a question that was directed towards yourself about how supportive have donors been in funding anticipatory action? How equipped and prepared are the local actors and or partners to carry out anticipatory action based on field experiences so far?
Thank you, Stephanie. Indeed, a good question. Maybe allow me to start by saying that funding made available for anticipatory action is a relatively new thing. And the reason for it is that until still recently, it was very difficult to justify and provide enough evidence the funding was going to be used for actions that were clearly planned and pre-identified, and the hazard that was expected to happen and maybe translate into a disaster was supported by scientific evidence and risk analysis. And I think that part is actually being addressed in many contexts. We have much more the capacity now and the ability to build on scientific analysis, on risk analysis, to come up with, as I said, plans that can somehow, I would say, encourage donors to see how the money will be used. And so all of that is part of building the confidence, I would say, of donors to come on board and to continue to support anticipatory action. So is there going to be more funding for anticipatory action? My sense is that yes, because we are indeed improving on these preconditions that will build the confidence of those who are putting the money into this. But as I said before, it has to be accompanied by a number of other measures. Just injecting funding early is not sufficient. So I think this is really what we have to say. From our in terms of what the IFRC is trying to do, we have an ambition to, by 2025, to have at least 25% of the draft allocations made available for anticipatory action. And it's something that we are advocating for with our partners and donors. But yes, I think really the question is that you need to build the confidence and to show the anticipatory action will translate in meaningful interventions that indeed reduce needs and are actually economically more advantageous than waiting for a disaster to happen. And this is something that we're building now, and that capacity has to be enhanced by collaborating with many partners. So this is not something that we can do alone. Allow me maybe just to flag here the fact that the German Red Cross, together with the IFRC and the Red Cross Crescent Climate Center, launched the Anticipation Hub last year. That's a space where we really plan to bring partners together to share knowledge, to share analysis, and to support each other in this learning process that is so important. And of course, governments and organizations are also joining the hub now and be part of this big community of practice.
Thank you very much for that. I mean, that's exactly a common trend, even what today's session is for. We need to continue to share these experiences and ensure that what we're doing is transparent, available knowledge for all, so that we can really build this momentum together. So I want to ask a question that was directed to Soraia, and it was actually related to the 2018 support for IDPs was short-term based on what you mentioned. So the question is, given you mentioned that Afghanistan is perpetually facing climate impacts like drought, are donors coming forward with long-term funding and resilience funding, especially in the context of impeding 2021 drought?
Thank you so much. Nice question. Actually, this is the government's responsibility to make some contingency plans for them. Actually, there was another question that was related to the peace process in Afghanistan. So most of the projects that right now in Afghanistan is going to be implemented, the donors are giving them in a very short period of time. It means that they are just waiting to the peace process, that what will happen for that one. So we hope that the humanitarian agencies or the UN agencies who are working in Afghanistan, they make some parts, or we can say some components for the projects to be implemented in Afghanistan that directly relates to the drought. We said that in 2018, we had a very bad lesson learned from the people or IDPs who came in Herat province or in West Zone of Afghanistan. So this is the responsibility of government, that they make some plans for that one with other stakeholders or with the UN agencies or humanitarian agencies, that if maybe if the peace process may not have a good impact, but at least they have some allocated budgets or resources for Afghan people or Afghan IDPs, that if this natural disaster happens, so there should be some plans for them, that if there is not any long project from the agencies, but at least the government, they have some resources to help people in a short period of time. So as a person who is working right now with a humanitarian organization, I can say that most of the projects that right now are implementing in Afghanistan, they are not in a long term. And it totally depends on the peace talks, that what will be the result of that one. And they are promising us that after the peace talk, it may be continued, but still we hope so for that one. Thank you.
Thank you. And while I have you, actually, about the same question on peace building, you know, it was specifically asked, you know, is there a place for women in peace building? And I mean, I can even add to that, and, you know, how can you link that to the humanitarian development, peace building nexus, and climate change? So kind of what's the woman's role there?
Actually, we can say that the peace negotiations that right now is in process, we can see that there is only 1 or 2 women who are representing from the a country that half of that country is women. So as a person who is working, and as I have talked with women who are around me, we are not that much, we can say that we are just waiting for the result. We see that in peace process or in peace negotiations, they have said that the Taliban actually, they have shared their opinion that women can work in those places which they are in need of that one. It means in hospitals, universities may be off. As a person who is a victim of that one, I have a very bad experience during Taliban regime that they were in Afghanistan. All the all the schools were closed. There was not any specific training center even for women. And when we were going outside, they were just punishing us. Believe me, they were beating us with just, it is something that I don't want to remember that one again. So still we are hopefully waiting for the peace negotiations, but there is not any specific place for Afghan women in those talks. And still we are hoping that the countries that they are supporting Afghan or Afghanistan or Afghan people, they do not stop their supports in future. If they stop it, so we will be isolated. It means that again, Afghan women will be in their homes. There is not any place to hear their voices. So we are waiting for the result. And as a woman right now, I can say that we are not that much, we are just waiting for the result that what will happen in future. But right now we see that there are lots of terrors. We can say there are lots of attacks in Afghanistan. Each day we are seeing suicide attacks. Even 2 weeks ago, maybe you are the witness that they just attacked on a girls' school in Kabul province, and around 65 innocent girls, they were killed. So it shows that still they are not eager to have the participation of women in different categories. But we hope that the world, it means that the countries who are supporting Afghanistan, they do not stop their support, and we hope to have them in future as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing. And yes, it is also a process still for women. And we wish we had more time to hear more about this with you. Soraia and the rest of our panelists, I don't even want this to end. How interesting it was, and how much there's still so much more to talk about, really. I want to thank you. It was a wonderful discussion. It was great to hear from everyone. A big thank you. I wish we could be all together and clap for Soraia, Amadou, Tiziana, and Praneeta. It was educational, inspirational, and so relevant. The conversation does not end here. Did not end here. When it comes to climate change, as with all topics that humanitarians, development, and peace actors work on, we must continue to think global and act local. Local actors must be engaged in a meaningful manner to determine the risks, adaptation, and mitigation measures. We must further examine the link to funding these services, as the current methods of funding are changing shape and further aligning with increased local action. We need to see this change inclusive of climate services and taking place on the ground to ensure local actors can respond. There is a need for wide-scale accountability and responsibility, additional advocacy, and an adequate funding environment in humanitarian action. Thank you again for attending today, and I will pass the mic back just for a moment to Nishani to go over last minute announcement. Nishani.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you to all the panelists. It was really an amazing discussion. We just wish we had more time. And this discussion does not end here. We will continue the discussion and the topic of climate, environment, and humanitarian change in our learning streams as well, which will happen after the summer. And we will also have more chance to discuss at today's later on afternoon session. We're going to have an interesting discussion also. Definitely, we will be looking at localization. We have an amazing lineup of speakers from a youth activist, Pallavish Kumar from Fiji. We have Adelina Kamal, who's the Executive Director of ASEAN. We have Robert Mardini, Director General of ICRC. we have Mr. Ilka Sami, Director of Disaster Preparedness and Prevention, and we have our own ICVA chair, new chair, who will be joining on the session. So please stay tuned in, and we hope you can join the conversation. There will be a recording of this session also available online on ICVA's website. So stay tuned. Thank you.